Unit 2, Metaphysical Poetry. Metaphysical poetry is a group of poems that share common characteristics. They are all highly intellectual, use rather strange imagery, use frequent paradox, and contain extremely complicated thoughts. The word metaphysical can be divided into two, meta plus physical. The word meta means after, and the literal meaning of the word metaphysical is beyond the nature actually. So metaphysical, meta means beyond, physical means nature. So the poem which deals a theme which is beyond the nature, which is against to the nature, which is against to the physical. Generally, metaphysics deals with the question that cannot be explained by science. It always questions the nature of reality in a philosophical way. The word metaphysical poetry is a philosophical concept which is used in literature, where many poets they portrayed their ideas which is beyond the physical existence. I already told you that the metaphysical poetry deals with the subject which is beyond the nature, which is not a normal one, which is not an ordinary one, which always deals a subject which is not existing or which can be beyond the existence of the physical world. The characteristics of metaphysical poetry. They were not only poets and also philosophers, they deal with metaphysical questions. There are other more specific characteristics that prompted Johnson to place the 17th century poets together. The poets were examining serious questions about the existence of God or whether a human could possibly perceive the world. The poets were sure to ponder those questions with humor. It also sought to shock the reader, wake him or from his or her normal existence in order to question the unquestionable. They mix ordinary speech with paradoxes and puns. As a result, it was strange, like comparing unlikely things such as lovers to compass or the soul of a drop of dew. The weird comparisons were called conceits. Metaphysical poets, they explored a very few common themes. They written mainly on love and God. The poems explored the theme of carpe diem. The word carpe diem literally means seize the day. Metaphysical poetry discussed deep things, which talks about soul, love, religion, reality, illusion, and etc. There can be unusual philosophies and comparisons that will make you to think and ponder. One of the most important characteristics of metaphysical poetry is undissociated sensibility. That means the combination of feeling and thoughts. They talk about the theme in a humorous way, and the tone is sometimes light, sometimes harsh. Their purpose is to present a new idea and make the reader to think. The idea of metaphysical poet is somewhat not definite. It is different for every person. It depends upon the perception and the experience of the reader. Every person will take something different out of the poem based on their belief and understanding. There were many maxims in metaphysical poetry. John Donne introduced saying into metaphysical poetry. The unusual comparison of things in poetry is one of its unique and most interesting characteristics. All the metaphysical poets have ability for unusual witty comparison juxtaposition, and imagery. These unusual comparisons are popularly known as metaphysical conceits. For example, Donne, in one of his poems, mentions spider love, which is completely contrary to the expectation of the reader. Spider love means it can be understood by the reader in a different manner. In another poem, he compares the lover's tears to the wine of the love, which is completely unusual use of juxtaposition. He also uses these actually metaphysical concepts, juxtaposition, like bright smoke, calling lovers as 2 points of compass, taking soul as dewdrop, and etc. It is intellectual and witty and paradox as well as passionate. This poetry is Platonic love. The word is taken from Plato, is a non-romantic love. There is no lust or a need of physical contact. It is spiritual love and is mostly for God. It is right in the words of A.C. Word. The metaphysical style is a combination of two elements, the fantastic form and style, and the incognous in matter manners. The versification of metaphysical poetry is also a coarse and jerky like its diction. Their style was not conventional, and the versification contrasts with much of Elizabethan writers. It arouses some extreme level of thoughts and feelings in the readers by asking life-altering questions. Let me introduce some famous metaphysical poets. John Donne, the most influential metaphysical poet and the pioneer among metaphysical poets. His personal relationship with spirituality is at the center of most of his work. The psychological analysis and the sexual realism of his work marked a dramatic departure from traditional and gentle verse. His early work, collected in satires and in songs and sonnets, was released in an era of religious suppression, especially his holy sonnets, which contains many of Donne's most enduring poems, which was released after the death of his wife in childbirth. Holy sonnets is exemplified in sonnet Death Be Not Proud, and the sonnet number 14, Batter My Heart That Person to God, and the sonnet number 17, Since She Whom I Loved Has Paid Her Last Debt. The another remarkable poets of metaphysical group is Herbert and Marvell. Their collection of poems were remarkable. Herbert, the son of a prominent literary patron to whom Donne dedicated his holy sonnet, spent the last year of his short life as a rector in a small town. On his deathbed, he handed his poems to a friend with a request that they may be published, only it might aid any dejected poor soul. Marvell wrote politically charged poems that would have cost him his freedom or his life. They had been made public. He was a secretary to John Milton, and once Milton was imprisoned during the Restoration, Marvell successfully petitioned to have the elder poet freed. His complex lyric and satirical poems were collected after his death amid an air of heresy. George Herbert written many metaphysical poems on the theme of God. He is popularly known as a religious metaphysical poet. On the other hand, Andrew Marvell, one of his famous poems, To His Coy Mistress, remarked his geniusness in the history of literature. Henry Vaughan, who was born on April 17, 1622, Anglo-Welsh poet and a mystic remarkable for the range and the intensity of his spiritual intuitions. He was educated at Oxford, studied law in London. Vaughan was recalled home in 1642 when the First Civil War was broke up. His poems with the 10th satire of Geneval English was published, followed by the second volume in 1647. His Silex Siltinus, published in the year 1615, and the next work, Glittering Flint, in the year 1655, followed by his famous prose work, Mount of the Olives or Solitary Devotion, published in the year 1652. These works shows his depth, religious convictions, and authenticity of his poetic genius. He also translated short moral and religious works and 2 medical works in prose. Richard Crashaw, who was born in the year 1613 in London and died in the year 1649 on August 21. He published many famous works like Epigrammatum Scornum Liberum, a collection of Latin verse on spiritual subject. He held a fellowship at Peterhouse, Cambridge, a center of high church thought, where he was ordinate. Crashaw's English religious poems were republished in Paris in 1652 under the title Carmen de Nastro, which means Hymn to Our Lord. Some of his finest lines are those appended to The Flaming Heart, a poem on Saint Teresa of Avila. Crashaw reflected little of the contemporary English metaphysical poets, adhering rather to the flamboyant imagery of the continental Baroque poets. He used consigns to draw analogies between the physical beauties of nature and the spiritual significance of existence. Let me explain the devices used in metaphysical poetry. Metaphysical poets like John Donne, Herbert, Marvell, Henry Vaughan, they used complex dramatic expression and a variety of literary devices like extended conceits, paradox, imagery, especially imagery in a colloquial, and they use their personal languages that challenges the ideas of morality, traditional love, and carnality. It is intellectual, intensive, even jarring, sometimes because when you mix and link two unlike things. For example, when you compare dove and eagle, which is contrary actually. So if you link the two unlike things, dove and eagle, which create an extended metaphor and anecdotes that is unique in comparison to previous poets of the age. Metaphysical poets believe love, religion, and morality, which the metaphysical poets considered through unusual comparisons, frequently employing unexpected similes and metaphors in displays of wit. The inclusion of contemporary scientific advancement was also typical. They have used the elements of metaphor, metaphysical conceits, paradoxes, and analogies. Metaphors and metaphysical conceits, a type of extended metaphor, are used to show a connection between two things that are not similar and to provoke the speaker's point in his poem. And they used a elaborate figurative language, original conceits, paradoxes, and philosophical topics. I can say that metaphysical poetry was at its peak during the 17th century in England and continental Europe. Metaphysical conceits. Metaphysical conceit is usually classified as a subtype of metaphor, an elaborate and strikingly unconventional or supposedly far-fetched metaphor, hyperbole, contradiction, simile, paradox, or oxymoron, causing a shock to the reader by the obvious dissimilarity, distance between stunning incompatibility of the object compared. For example, in Valediction, Forbidding Mourning, the famous poem written by John Donne, in the poem, he compares the two souls in love to the 2 points of a geometer complex, that is a complex. He says the fixed point is women and the rotating point is men. So this comparison may understood by the reader in different manner. For example, the boy who always comes around a girl, or a girl who controls a boy who comes around always her. So this is how actually the reader may understand in a different way. So that is what we call it as metaphysical conceit, which is a subtype of metaphor, which may be a contradiction. Sometimes it may be a paradox. Sometimes it may be an oxymoron. Sometimes it may be a long-tailed metaphor, which can give a new idea to the reader. So we can summarize that metaphysical poets are the great and pioneer one during the 17th century. The term metaphysical was coined by the famous poet critic Samuel Johnson, who actually called metaphysical poets are a group of poets lived in the 17th century whose works are characterized by the inventive use of consigns and by a greater emphasis on the spoken rather than the lyrical quality of their verse. And they have given a lack of coherence and the diversity of style among the poets. It has been suggested that calling them Baku poets. Once the metaphysical style was established, however, it was occasionally adapted by other and especially younger poets to fit appropriate circumstances. These poets are noted for the unnaturalness. Johnson wrote in Lives of the most prominent poets in the late 1700 that was a race of writers had appeared that might be termed metaphysical poets. The term was likely taken from Dryden, who had described John Donne as affecting metaphysics in his satires and his aromas verses. It was not until the 20th century that many of these poets were adequately recognized for their talent and originality. The great metaphysical poets like John Donne, Henry Vaughan, Andrew Marvell, George Herbert, they are the one who has been shortlisted as the best writers and the originators of their age. It is all because of their writings, and they have taken some ideology which can be enjoyed by the readers. So these are all the key terms which will help you to understand the word which I have used: coherence, a model of continuity, and consigned, so a model of value, and metaphysical I have explained. So the theme which is beyond the nature. And so these are the terminal questions. So write a short note on metaphysical poetry. So what do you mean by conceit? And discuss the device used by the metaphysical poets. Thank you.